This was rather odd and at the same time super traumatizing. And it was like this. Going back from a rave, my designated driver promised me that he was okay. I saw those yellow and black curve ahead signs. I looked to my left and he was dead asleep at the wheel. I'd love to say that I did something heroic or tough, but I wailed like a banshee and I tucked the steering wheel left into a ditch, and I then proceeded to wail at him until he gave me the driver's seat. He passed out immediately, and I still to this day thank ecstasy for saving my life. I wrecked a pill in a bathroom 30 minutes before shutting down. If I would been asleep, as I usually am on drives, I would have died. If you are going to consume these kind of substances that are considered illegal, make sure you do it in your own home, never in a place that can be busted. Always find a designated driver. Sleep in a car. None of it is worth it. And honestly, I hold no ill will to the guy. And none of us knew. It was just the blind leading the blind. I was walking in the woods with some of my friends, and we were walking for a good hour or two. And it was a rather large forest. We were on the way back to my house when it turned to talk. All of a sudden, my friend was gone. I look down the tree and I can see him. I can see my friend. His eyes were totally big as plates. He was looking at something behind me. He looked at me and his eyes opened more and he started to run. I have never seen him run so fast. I have never even seen him run normally, so I started running. After that, we were out of the forest after a few seconds of running. Me and my friend were standing there, looking deep into the woods, and a tall guy wearing black rubbery clothes appeared and approached us. He had a nice long beard and he was black. He had a small knife in his shoulder, like a pocket knife. There was blood in his face and in his mouth. He didn't seem to care that we were looking at him. He looked into my eyes and said, "Get out of my wart!" Yes, sir, yes, sir. And we ran and never looked back. I was 18 years old, and I was also 6 months pregnant. I was sound asleep when I was suddenly woken up to a ruckus in the other room. My relatives and my friends had been drinking that night, and I somehow slept through the entire thing. My dad always partied with us and was usually a good time, but on a few occasions when liquor was involved, instead of beer, he became an angry drunk person who tried to fist fight everyone. Not the best thing about him, but he was a good person. The ruckus was actually him trying to fight my friend, my brother, and my husband. After I woke up, everything spiraled and my dad was getting his ass kicked, which just made him angrier. Finally, I had enough. I ran next door and I threatened to call the cops. My grandma was awake by then and trying to keep my dad from coming inside. She was standing between my dad and me, and by that point, for whatever reason, all of his anger was geared to little old pregnant me, who had nothing to do with any of it. And then something in his brain snapped, and he pulled his huge knife and cut his wrist over and over in front of us. Then pointed at me and screamed, "This is your fault!" I was a married adult at that point, but that night I was scared little girl that I used to be when he would get violent with my mom growing up. Then He ran off into the dark and hid in a houseboat on a property next door. The cops couldn't find him, and all I was worried about was him bleeding out. But he eventually showed back up hours later, and my grandma patched him up, and I was never the same after that. He didn't die, but it still traumatized me. I didn't know how much it affected me until later. To this day, that image still pops into my head, and I have to quickly think of anything else. I never talk about it. This is the most I've ever talked about it, to be honest, and I'm not happy. And even thinking about it makes me sad because he died from COVID in 2020. And even though he had his moments, I used to be such a daddy's girl and couldn't imagine my life without him. So, having that terrible memory of him consumes me with guilt anytime I think about it, because I know it would break his heart knowing it's a memory I have of him. My friend and I were sitting on a dirt road, just talking and stuff, like we usually would do after school since we lived super close to each other. She looks past my shoulder, and as I go to look, she says, "Hey, Dirt! Hey, Dirt, get up! Don't look behind you, and run to that sign at the end of the road, okay?" Me, being slightly scared and confused, hesitantly agreed, and we both run on the count of 3. We start running, and after making it to the sign, I look to where she was looking a few moments ago, and I see a pure black figure, probably 6 to 7 feet tall, which is equals to 2.5 meters, slowly walking towards us. We turn away to talk for close to 7 seconds, and when we turned back, it was gone. There was no way it could have gotten out of our sights that quickly, because it was a completely open space before, with no cover around and no place to hide. After about 10 minutes, we were sitting on the road again. Yeah, we're kind of stupid. And then she shakes my shoulder and points to a little curb that curves into a different neighborhood nearby. I do, and I see the figure again, hunched over on the side. Keep in mind, this is a fairly busy part of the area, so there were plenty of cars. We watch for a few seconds before a car comes and shines its headlights on the area before turning. In that tiny moment that the headlights were saying on the figure, it disappears. It didn't run, it didn't stand, it just disappeared. It vanished into thin air. After the car's headlights weren't on it anymore, it was back on the side of the road, hunched over in the exact same spot as before. After seeing that, we start walking towards my house, and I get that awful feeling that someone is staring at me, or even worse, something. I look back and I see the figure standing beside the sign we were standing beside a few minutes ago. After running all the way home, we both brush it off until a few hours later. A few more of our friends arrive, and we go outside again. We just ran around and goofed off again. As we were walking back, we all looked behind us for some reason, and saw the figure in the middle of the road. We ran home and never saw it again right after that. I was in high school riding around with a guy friend of mine, a year or two older than me, so it felt super cool to be with someone who could drive. I was having a great time. We were laughing and we were joking. We were heading to a friend's house. On the way there, you have to pass under an overpass for a big freeway. I'm talking about 5 stories up. Someone jumped off the overpass. It was too high to tell if it was a man or a woman. I noticed it first, and I screamed, and my friend immediately covered my eyes with one hand so I wouldn't see them land, and pulled onto a side street so the overgrass was behind us. He got out of the car and called the police from his smartphone, but I knew it was totally pointless. After that, we both drove in silence to our friend's house. I saw two guys getting shot at by some men of the mob. That's the best word I can use, the mob. It was 3 years ago, back in July 2019. I was driving by with my parents. Dad was driving, mom was in the back seat, and I was in the passenger seat. And there was a truck right in front of us. We were waiting for the red light when suddenly a group of three people with tactical vests and large caliber weapons descended from the truck and started shooting into a parked car with two individuals inside just a few meters away from us, but in the opposite side of the road. Fortunately, we managed to flee away really quick, but it was terrifying. Mom didn't even react to it at first, 'cause luckily she was distracted reading something on the phone, but later on we were shaking, especially me, because I saw those dead bodies. It's just awful what an assault rifle can do. I couldn't sleep properly thinking about the whole thing for a week or so. A truly awful experience though, and I think it has been the most awful, dangerous, and also the most scariest thing I've ever witnessed in my whole life. What the scariest thing I've ever witnessed with my own eyes? Hmm. Watching my classmate and friend having a stroke. I was in high school. We were on a school trip and we stayed overnight in camp. I stayed in a room with her. She was a diabetic. I woke up in the middle of the night out of nowhere and I was whispering her name. I don't even know why. Just to check if she was okay, I suppose. She wasn't answering, just snoring or so. So, I went for a teacher with words. Teacher, 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 I think she has a stroke. I would rather be yelled at for a false alarm. They ran into our room and they lit up the lights. Her eyes were wide open, yet she was still asleep. Foam coming out of her mouth. Teacher took her by her shoulders and he tried to wake her up with that gentle shaking. No use. I was crying and I tried to guide him on how to use the syringe, the last help one. Oh my god. I told him, and my classmate started shaking and screaming. She was taken to the hospital, and now she's completely fine. I was 10 years old, and I was out moose hunting with my dad, my uncle, and my brother. The area had some bear sign, claw marks on trees, and such, but we always made camp there, so it wasn't a big deal. So, a couple days in, and my brother and I were digging around in the forest, and he found this really cool stick. Overcome by jealousy, I took it that night and hid it up one of the trails leading out of the camp. The next day, I went to get it alone, and as I was walking up the trail, only 30 feet from camp, some brown bear cubs popped onto the trail in front of me, followed closely by the mother. It was really huge. She was really huge. She was looking at me. I was totally scared shitless, and it was about 15 feet away, which is roughly 4.5 meters. The cubs ran up a tree faster than you wouldn't believe. Oh my god, how the hell do they climb so fast? And the mother started to walk down the trail towards me. kind of slow, sizing me up, I think. I started backing up towards the camps, walking backwards. It felt like ages before the two of us got back to the camp. Dad was in his camp chair, his weapon, a .306, prop on the arm facing the other way. I told him there was a bear, and when he raised his gun, that brown bear scampered off quick. It must have been shot at before because it recognized a gun. I could have been totally screwed up pretty bad that day.